It is my pleasure to introduce to Google author and radio producer Reese Erlich, here to discuss his new book, The Iran Agenda. Hopefully all of you have copies. If you don't, you can get them at p3books.com. Mr. Erlich's history in journalism goes back 40 years. He first worked as a staff writer and research editor for Ramparts, an investigative reporting magazine published in San Francisco from 1963 to 1975. Today, he works as a full-time print and broadcast freelance reporter. He regularly reports for CBS, the National Public Radio, along with various international stations. His articles appear in the San Francisco Chronicle, St. Petersburg Times, and the Dallas Morning News. His television documentaries have aired on PBS stations nationwide. Erlich's book, Target Iraq, What the News Media Didn't Tell You, co-authored with Norman Solomon, became a bestseller in 2003, and actually there are copies for sale today for $10 at the table. In 2006, Mr. Erlich shared the prestigious Peabody Award as a segment producer for the public radio series Crossing East, A History of Asians in the United States. And I'd like to note as well that in addition to writing about international affairs and politics, Reese writes about jazz, music, and culture, and he just finished an interview with Joni Mitchell, which he was telling me about earlier today. So I'd like to welcome a true expert, Reese Erlich.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me now? Okay. It's a real pleasure to speak today on the very same day that President Ahmadinejad is speaking at the UN. And what brilliant planning by Google staff to have me here on that very day, having used Google Earth to track his motions and travels for many weeks. And actually, it's pure coincidence. But anyway, I'm still very happy to be here. And I wanted to start off by just talking a little bit about what I've been doing the last couple of days. On Friday night, I went on Hannity and Combs on Fox News. Yes, we hear chuckles from the audience. It is, for those of you who don't know, it is one of these, they claim it's the second most watched cable television show. A avowed right-winger and an alleged liberal go at it, and they invite guests to have food thrown at them and to be interrupted. But anyway, we were talking about whether Ahmadinejad should have the right to speak at Columbia University. That was the topic of the debate. And, of course, he did speak yesterday. And the context for all this, besides the obvious right that someone should have a right to speak on a campus and to allow the faculty and students of that university to make up their own mind about what they think of him, it fits in a wider context. At the moment, the Bush administration is on a major campaign to demonize Ahmadinejad and to demonize Iran with the intention of preparing public opinion to allow the U.S. to bomb Iran. And I will go into much greater detail about that. I'm not saying absolutely for sure the U.S. will bomb Iran, but there is a very much increased likelihood, and we can see it in the campaign through Fox News, through the Wall Street Journal, through the Weekly Standard, and various conservative media, which then in turn bleed over into the New York Times and CNN and AP and so on, that there's a certain set of assumptions about Iran, all of which are false, but it leads you inevitably to the conclusion that we've got to do something, and that something will be a military attack, not a invasion and occupation as the United States has done in Iraq, but a bombing which will have very serious consequences in the months and the years afterwards. So let me start with some of the common arguments that the Bush administration puts forward and in turn are echoed in the media and in turn often believed by many people in the United States. In the Iran agenda, I go into much greater detail on this, but I'll just sketch out a few points. The main argument that's used against Iran is that it is close to developing a nuclear bomb, and that a nuclear-tipped, nuclear-capable Iran is a disaster for the people of the United States, for the people of Israel, for the people of the Middle East in general and the world, and that we can't possibly let that happen. And that Iran is developing this program in secret, and the U.S. must do something to stop it. Diplomatic, if possible, military if necessary. Well, in my book, and one of the key arguments in this theory is that Iran is a country rich in natural gas and oil. So what possible reason could they have for wanting nuclear power? They've got all the energy they could possibly want to. So it's an obvious sign of their intention to develop nuclear weapons because they're using the nuclear power as a cover. Well, that argument relies on historic amnesia on the part of people in this country, because it was only the 1970s, not that long ago, when the United States government virtually insisted that Iran develop nuclear power. And that was at a time when they had more gas and more oil than they do today. Why? Because the Shah was in power. It was a pro-U.S. dictator. After all, the United States had gotten rid of Iran's one actual democracy. The Prime Minister Mossadegh of 1953, when the U.S. CIA, together with the British, overthrew that government to bring in a dictator. And the Shah was an ally. And the United States, specifically General Electric and Westinghouse, had turnkey nuclear power plants to sell. And they wanted to sell them big time to Iran. Before the Shah was overthrown in 1979, Iran had 10 contracts to build nuclear power plants, including from the United States, Britain, and France. No, sorry, Germany, France, and the United States. And this was done, and they were going to be, Iran had an agreement for nuclear processing of fuel for these plants. And what's more, the Shah had, at least on 3 occasions, talked about the possibility of building a nuclear bomb. Right? All the same kind, much more anything. By the way, the current government of Iran absolutely denies that they have any intention of building a nuclear bomb. The Shah talked about it openly, and yet not a moment, not a whisper of protest from the United States or from Israel at the time, because the Shah was a close ally. So basically, there's this two-tiered system, which is that if you're friendly to the United States and you're illegally developing an atomic bomb, well, we'll kind of look the other way. If you're an enemy of the United States and you're not developing a nuclear bomb, we'll invent information to make it look like you are in order to justify all kinds of things. The second argument is that Iran is critical in supplying arms and munitions and technology to Iraqis who are killing American troops. And that argument, because the nuclear weapons argument is so weak that it doesn't get very far, the Iraqi argument is being used much more. Quick footnote on the question of, is Iran actually developing a nuclear bomb? In this country, it is assumed as a fact that they are, and the only question is how quickly will they be able to develop it? There's only one group in the entire world that really knows that question and has the ability to prove it one way or another. That's the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency. It's a UN body that is very good at its work. It goes in and inspects. It takes soil and air samples. It can determine if somebody is developing following illegal procedures, etc. And they have said categorically that there is no proof that Iran is diverting its nuclear fuel for purposes of enrichment to make a bomb. And there is no proof that Iran intends to make a bomb. And what's more, they've reached an agreement just in the last month to have Iran answer all the questions about its previous nuclear program and to allow full inspections, which is what you would ask of any country to determine if, in fact, they are illegally using it. The United States, of course, wants to ignore that and proceed to escalate the issues with Iran. So on the question of Iraq, we hear that the Iranians are providing these sophisticated metal discs, which are then attached to explosives and used to blow up armored vehicles in the United States. These EFPs, they're called. EFPs, explosively formed penetrators. And supposedly these discs are so high-tech that they can only be manufactured in Iran and then secretly shipped into Iraq. Well, in fact, those discs are made in machine shops all over Iraq because they're not that sophisticated. They were first used not by the Iranians, but by the IRA in Britain as part of the Irish Republican Army previous battles against the British in Northern Ireland. And they're used in Lebanon and other parts of the Middle East. And what's more, they're commercially available to mining companies because they're also used in controlled explosions in mining minerals. So the idea that this one disk is unique, that can only be provided by Iran, is simply a myth. I could go through in greater detail if in questions people are interested about all the other supposed weapons that are being provided. But what has happened is that when I ask people, who are we fighting in Iraq? Just answer that question mentally to yourself in a moment. Who is the United States fighting in Iraq? Well, the first answer usually is Al-Qaeda, and the second answer is Iran. Well, neither of those are true. I mean, there is a group called Al-Qaeda of Mesopotamia, a small group that is indeed causing a lot of damage and killing civilians and fighting the United States. But the United States is fighting Sunni insurgents and all kinds of Shia insurgents, some of whom are part of the government. That's who the United States is. The United States is fighting the Iraqi people, not some outside power that has come in to disrupt things in Iraq. So what is Iran doing in Iraq? Iran has had very long history with all of the Shia parties and the Kurdish groups in Iraq. Those parties have had their headquarters in Iraq. Now, I'm talking about these parties, by the way, which are the official government, the elected, allegedly democratically elected government of Iraq, are Dawa, Skiri, Muqtada al-Sadr's group, and the Kurds. 3 out of those 4 had their headquarters in Iran for years. Today, you can go to Iran. I went to Tehran. And there's a huge office building with the Skiri headquarters. It's one of the leading parties in Iraq. They still have their headquarters in Tehran today. That same group is allied with the United States. So Iran provides money, political support, and probably arms to a variety of groups in Iraq, just like the United States does. And the United States has never proven that, to the extent there are munitions going in, that they're intended to kill American soldiers. The arms go to these militias so that they can further their political aims in Iraq, not with the intention of trying to kill American soldiers. But Iran provides a convenient scapegoat to blame some outside power for everything that's going bad in Iraq. And in the book, I go into much greater detail, but basically, if the state of Iran disappeared tomorrow, there was absolutely no aid of any kind going to any group in Iraq, the war in Iraq would be continuing with just the same intensity, just as many as American soldiers would be dying, precisely because the U.S. is seen as an occupying power that is doing no good for the people of Iraq. The third argument is that Iran presents an immediate danger to the state of Israel. Ahmadinejad denies the Holocaust. A nuclear-armed Iran would launch an offensive attack against Israel, causing the destruction of Israel and the Jewish people. Ahmadinejad calls for the destruction of the state of Israel by his statement, we must wipe Israel off the map. I'm sure you've all heard that repeated over and over again. In short, Ahmadinejad is the new Hitler. And that we hear. I heard that on Hannity and Combs a whole lot. Well, ask yourself a simple question. If Iran was really that great of a danger, immediate military threat to Israel, it has long-range missiles. It has today missiles that can reach all the cities of Israel. Why hasn't Iran launched an offensive conventional attack on Israel? Why is everything on the atomic attack? Why hadn't they simply rained down missiles on Israel if that's their intention, to destroy Israel? Well, the answer is because A, that's not what their intention is, and B, if somehow that were to happen, it would give Israel and the United States the perfect excuse to launch an attack on and flatten all of Iran, to destroy the entire country overnight. Because certainly the United States and to some extent Israel have that capability of doing that. And the Iranians know that. The people in power in Iran are angry, but they're not crazy. So if they're not willing to launch an offensive conventional attack on Israel, why would they possibly launch an atomic attack, which would invite an atomic retaliation? And let's even take the argument a step further. Let's say that I'm wrong about Iran's intentions to develop a nuclear weapon. Let's say they really are going to. The best intelligence, including the CIA, et cetera, say they're years away from getting an atomic bomb. But let's even say they're just a matter of months. Somehow they've secretly developed it so they can build 1 or 2 or 3 atomic bombs in the next short period of time. What can you do with 3 or 4 or 5 atomic bombs facing a country like Israel that has 300 atomic bombs and the United States, which has the most sophisticated atomic arsenal in the entire world? What can you do? You don't launch an offensive attack with 6 bombs, which is the most they could conceive of, even under the worst case scenario, is the most they could develop over many, many years. Right? North Korea, we now know, has roughly 6 atomic weapons. Have they launched an atomic attack on South Korea, let alone on the United States? No. To the extent that North Korea has done it, in their mind, and by the way, I do not support that or think it's a good idea, but in their mind, they see it as defensive. That if they are attacked, they have kind of a last-ditch effort that they can drop these bombs, and therefore they hope to deter an attack. But there's absolutely no way that Iran is going to launch an offensive attack against Israel. That's not their intention. It's certainly not their capability. What Israel is worried about, and what the United States, and they use the nuclear argument as a scare tactic, because, oh my God, if you've got another Hitler in power and he's about to launch a Holocaust against the Jewish people, then almost anything is legitimate to defend against that. If that was true, I would certainly support that. I mean, if somehow we went back in time and we could have stopped Hitler earlier, we would have all done that. But that's not the case. And in fact, if by so over-exaggerating the case, you simply distort reality, and the net result would be catastrophic, both for the United States and for Israel. What would happen if the United States attacked Iran? Well, the first thing that happened was the United States has very strong military superiority. Its planes and missiles could go into Iran, take out much of their air force, knock out many of their missiles, knock out not just the nuclear facilities, but a whole range of military and civilian targets. Hundreds, if not thousands, of civilians would die. They know that, but they call them, what do they call them? What's the term? Collateral damage. Thank you very much. Collateral damage. That's just the civilians that happen to be living too close to these facilities that get bombed. And in an immediate, short-term military sense, the United States would be victorious. And the Bush administration would go on TV and triumphantly announce, maybe he'd even land on an aircraft carrier again, I'm not sure. And he would triumphantly announce that we have set back their nuclear plans forever and dealt a blow to the evil Hitler of our time. But what they don't talk about is what would happen in the weeks and the months and the years after such an attack. Because the first thing that would happen was the United States really would face serious problems in Iraq. Because the people of Iraq would be outraged, as would be the people of Palestine and of Lebanon. And with or without encouragement from Iran, they would start attacking U.S. forces and they would attack Israel. Israel lost its last war against Hezbollah in Lebanon. They're now resupplied. An attack on Iran could very well trigger another war between Hezbollah in Lebanon and Israel. Hamas could well step up its attacks inside Israel. And the forces in Iraq, the few allies the United States does manage to have now among the Shias would be completely alienated. Look at what's happening around this Blackwater affair, where the entire country has finally united on something, and it's against the U.S. backed Blackwater mercenaries. So you see that's a little example of what would happen on a much wider scale. And then, of course, a very real danger of real terrorist attacks in Europe and the United States, carried out by people angry at what the U.S. had done. So the consequences, you think about Iraq, and it's exactly the same scenario. If we were here 3 or 4 years ago, you would be asking me, well, doesn't Saddam Hussein have weapons of mass destruction? Doesn't Saddam Hussein have nuclear weapons? Isn't he going to arm terrorists and take them to the United States? Right? You remember that it wasn't that long ago when we all heard those arguments. Every one of them turned out to be false. Well, we're hearing the exact same scenario, almost down to the same notes on the scale for Iran, about how dangerous they are, they're helping terrorists, blah, 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 all of which is either made up entirely or exaggerated. And just as there were no terrorists in Iraq prior to the U.S. invasion, but there are now, the same thing would be multiplied should the United States attack Iran. Now, what do I think of the government that's currently in power and of Ahmadinejad? I've traveled to Iran and Iraq 5 times. I stay in touch with many friends in Iran, and there is no question that the combination of mullahs and capitalists running Iran today are evil people. It's a repressive society. It's a government that the people of Iran are not real happy with. There's inflation. There is a repression of women's rights. There is closing down of newspapers. There's no freedom to demonstrate or petition. The judiciary is a tool of the people in power, so there's no fair or anything close to a fair judicial system. And the people of Iran are not real happy about it. And there are groups in Iran who are organizing to make change. And I went and I talked with many of the leaders of those groups pro-democracy, people who do not like Ahmadinejad, who do not like the current system in Iran, who want to see significant changes. People like Shirin Ebadi, who was the Nobel Peace Prize winner and a wonderful and great human rights activist in Iran. And I talked to every single one of the leaders that I talked to. Again, greater details in the book. Not a single one of them agreed with U.S. policy towards Iran. Not a single one of them wanted a military attack. Not a single one of them wanted sanctions. Not a single one of them wanted UN votes criticizing Iran. Not one. And if you listen carefully, when the Bush administration talks about evil Iran, blah, 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 Hitler, where are the Iranians that he cites as saying that they support his policies? He doesn't, because he can't. There aren't any. It's so bad they can't even pay the Shah's son to come out in support of U.S. policy. The guy, the Shah's son, is alive and well in Washington. I interviewed him. There's a section, one chapter, dealing with him and other opposition figures. He's a very personable guy, very nice, clean cut, wears very nice suits. He wants to come back to power, by the way, and reestablish a constitutional monarchy, is what he says. But he's opposed to the U.S. bombing of Iran. So there's nobody that the U.S. can find to support its policies among Iranian exiles or certainly nobody inside Iran. But that doesn't matter, because this is not about bringing democracy to the people of Iran. This is about U.S. hegemony imposing the United States' will on Iran. So what the people of Iran told me, the leaders, I talked to workers and to students and to human rights activists of all different kinds, they say, look, get your government to back off. The worst thing they can do is make these threats, because those threats and the promises to, quote, bring democracy to Iran make our situation much worse. The government here says every time we protest, oh, you're tools of the United States. And if the United States bombed Iran, it would not cause the people of Iran to rise up against their government. It would unite the people of Iran back in support of their government. Think of the reaction in this country after 9/11. Whether you voted for Bush or you voted against Bush, after 9/11, there was a tremendous sense of unity in this country that we've got to do something. And of course, Bush took that sentiment and manipulated it and took it in all the wrong directions. But the country united around its leader. Well, the same thing would happen if Iran was bombed. And so there's this kind of screwy thinking in Washington. And I went back and I interviewed. I talked to former CIA people and former State Department people, really intelligent people who should know what's going on. And I said, God, what is the Bush administration thinking? Because they say what the theory is that you bomb Iran, it so destabilizes the government that the people of Iran will rise up and get rid of the government. They really believe that. And I said, does this sound familiar? What people in what nearby country were supposed to rise up with flowers and candies to support our invasion? Yes. So it's a rerun of the same faulty thinking that led the U.S. into Iraq. Not the same military tactics, but the same kind of faulty thinking. So I will conclude. I see some hands, and I will absolutely call on people. I want to leave lots of time for questions and answers, and I'll stay as long as you want. You guys have got free food here. I can't believe it. And I have to say that, for a company to allow these kind of forums to take place and then to give away free books, hey, we got a great thing here, and appreciate it. And I really like speaking at a company that is both a noun and a verb. So you have, and I'm sure you've all Googled me. I haven't even talked about my jazz and music writing and all that stuff. If anybody has any questions about that, I'm sure you know more about me than I do by now. So I'll be very happy to talk about that. Well, thank you very much. Let's go into questions and answers. You have your hand up. Oh, sorry. Oh, yeah, let's do it so we're all on tape.
So the Bush administration has built up a lot of credibility for being irrational cowboys, with their Iraq war action, right? So diplomatically, it seems like it would be useful to leverage that before the administration changed. And so what's your take on, to me, it's not plausible to say that Iran foreign policy is based on, hegemony and ideology, something about, there has to be a tangible benefit to their actions in terms of U.S. interests. So how much of what they're doing is posturing in a way that makes everybody think that we're going to threaten Iran, and while Condoleezza Rice or whatever is working on diplomatic actions, I don't know exactly what she could be doing, but in some sense pursuing some sort of alternative policy that is only effective with a threat of this irrational cowboy, bombing your nuclear facilities?
That's a very legitimate question. And 6 months ago, I would have said that's probably what's going on. In fact, that was going on. That is, there was a debate within the administration. The hawks, led by Cheney, and at one point Rumsfeld, wanted to bomb Iran. And the so-called realists, led by Condi Rice, wanted to explore other means instead. It's very hard to know in the moment who's won out on that debate or if the debate is still going on. But there are strong indications that they're much more serious now about bombing Iran, and it's not just a diplomatic bluff. Now, again, I'm not predicting for sure that they will bomb Iran. But the reason it's more dangerous now is that you've got half the U.S. Navy in and around the waters of Iran, which gives them the military capability of doing it. The British press, in not only The Guardian but the Sunday Telegraph, has consistently been running articles that the decision is already made to bomb. And my suspicion, reading between the lines, is those are leaked from British sources who don't like the idea, British diplomatic government sources, who don't like that idea, and who are trying to get the word out in some way to expose what Bush is up to. And then we see this campaign through the right-wing media, and I don't know if you know this, in the last day or two, Senator Lieberman and Kyle introduced an amendment to the U.S. Senate that would specifically allow military action against Iran. This is just very, very recent development. It's a 2-paragraph amendment that's being debated now in the Senate. And it says that Iran, all methods should be used to stop Iran's blah, 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 diplomatic, blah, 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 including military. So it's basically a okey doke to attack Iran should the administration want to. All of those signs are very dangerous to me, and far more dangerous today than, say, 6 months ago.
So the follow-up then is, Bush may say that this is to impose democracy in Iran, the people are going to rise up. What are the true motives for the U.S. interest to follow up on that action?
Right. So what are the real reasons? You all heard about what the ostensible reasons were, and we all know the ostensible reasons in Iraq didn't pan out either. When I ask, if you say the U.S. is mainly interested in oil in the Middle East, you're immediately charged with being a conspiracy theorist. How can you say that? How can that possibly be true? Why, we fight for democracy and truth, justice, and the American way. No, that was Superman. Or no, Batman. Anyway. We are, that's the standard reply. But when I went to Washington, I talked to the guy, Paul Pillar, who's a former national intelligence officer for the CIA, whose area of expertise included Iran. And I said, what are United States strategic interests in Iran? His first answer, oil. So these are the people making the policy. They understand it. Now, what does that mean? It means that the United States, as an empire, needs control of oil resources. And they can't be denied by some other country. And in order to make sure we have that oil, we have to have either military bases or armed presence in regions of the world. And Iran happens to be at a very critical conjuncture militarily and geopolitically. And they go into a whole list of these are strategic. So when you strip away the fancy language, it's oil and geopolitics and military reasons, and it has absolutely nothing to do with democracy. Because, of course, we'd be very happy to have another Shah back in power if somehow they could do it. There was no Democrat, but he was pro-U.S. That's the bottom line. Yeah, sure thing. Here. Wait, I think we have the mic.
If the U.S. were to bomb Iran, when do you think that would happen, and what time frame, and what can we do to stop it?
Right. It's very hard to know. I know they wouldn't bomb before Labor Day, because you don't launch new products in August. Wasn't that one of the Bush administration's comments prior to the Iraq War? Now remember, they can launch the war anytime they want because there's actually no threat. It's not like somebody attacked us and therefore we have to respond immediately. They can pick the date. They're not going to attack during the last 2 weeks of December because everybody's on vacation. They don't want to get too far into next year, too far into the election campaigns and run the danger of conflicts with the Democrats, et cetera. They want to keep, and so far actually do have most major Democrats would probably acquiesce to this process. So it's either going to be before mid-December or sometime early next year. That would be by a process of elimination.
And as a quick follow-up to that, if a Democrat is elected in November, assuming we don't bomb them before that, which hopefully we won't, but then a Democrat is elected, do you think this will not happen, or do you think we're still likely
Well,
to?
I wish I could say, as a card-carrying member of the Democratic Party, I wish I could say, if the Democrats elected, all our worries are over. Unfortunately, the same debate and the same mentality exists in the upper levels of the Democratic Party as it does in the Republican Party. And if you look at the leading candidates, Clinton, Obama, and Edwards, all have horrible positions about Iran. Nancy Pelosi, there was a bill, remember a few months ago they voted on the war funding bill, and there was a clause in there that specifically prohibited the use of these funds for attacking Iran. And that clause was taken out by Nancy Pelosi, leading liberal of the area. So there is, I think the same debate will continue. The best thing I could say, by the way, this is not therefore an endorsement of Giuliani or something like that, or whoever else the Republicans nominate. I think what it means is that the battle is going to continue, and hopefully it will mean less likely of an immediate threat of a military attack.
Thank you for visiting. There was an interesting show yesterday on KQED talking about the influence of the AIPAC on American policy, foreign policy in particular. Do you have any insights of what is AIPAC doing? And does it have anything to do with shaping the policy towards Iran?
Right. AIPAC is the American-Israel PAC. It's the leading pro-Israel organization in the United States. They are very much at the spearhead of pushing the United States to attack Iran. And that reflects the viewpoint of the current leadership in Israel as well. The top generals in Israel gave an on-the-record interview to the Sunday Telegraph of London a couple months ago, in which they talked about their plans to bomb Iran, Israeli plans to bomb Iran, including the possibility of a nuclear bomb on Iran. So this is not a secret. And AIPAC is very active in pushing. And what I would say is that their interests coincide very nicely with the hawks of the administration's interests from slightly different places, both coming to the same conclusion that the U.S. should bomb Iran, or, flat out, the U.S. should bomb Iran. And AIPAC has an influence among top-level Democrats as well, and that accounts for some of the waffling or acquiescence on the part of some of those Democrats I mentioned earlier. It's easier once you hang it around. We'll move it around the room, too. Okay, go ahead.
Well, I have a bunch of questions for you to take issue with the things that you've said. I guess maybe you can wait until there's time for one-on-one discussion also. But to start, I would ask you, what do you think Iran's intentions are with their nuclear program if you don't believe that they are weapons programs?
Okay.
I have some follow-ups after
Sure,
that.
absolutely. I don't know what Iran's intentions are. I know that the IAEA, the only body that was correct about Iraq's non-nuclear program leading up to the war, says that there's absolutely no indication that Iran is diverting fuel for enrichment to nuclear grade. Let me just finish the answer. And what's more is that with inspectors on the ground, they can determine if that would happen in the future. That's the most you can ask of any country full inspections, full transparency, and then we'll see what they. We don't have to trust them because they're nice people, because I don't think they are, but allowing and by the way, just to correlate that, bombing them and bombing their nuclear facilities would simply drive things underground and make it much worse if that was their intention to do so. But go ahead. Do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, more than one. If you don't believe that you have any idea what their intentions are, you're just willing to throw your hands up and say, I don't know what their intentions are. Do you expect Israel to risk their existence on such a hypothesis also?
Well, first of all, I didn't say I don't know and throw my hands up. I said let the IAEA do its job. Well, let me ask the question to you, since we'll have a dialogue. If Iran is such an immediate danger to Israel, why haven't they launched a conventional attack on Israel?
Because they're going to get an atomic bomb to do it with in a few years. So why do it with conventional weapons now?
But if they had an immediate threat, that's the grounds on which you attack a country. If they don't have an atomic bomb for a few years, why not wait a few years?
They will.
They will? Well, then why are they threatening to do it now? Israel is on the record publicly, Sunday Telegraph, threatening that they have plans to immediately bomb Iran.
No, Israel's plan that I've seen promoted by the top echelons of the Israeli military is that they will not allow Iran to get an atomic bomb under any circumstances, and that they will bomb Iran in order to prevent them from doing so. That's not the same. Saying that they will do it in order to prevent Iran from getting a bomb is not the same thing as saying that they're going to do it today. I don't see the inconsistency.
Okay, well, I do. So we'll continue with other questions.
I think debates and hearing opinions like yours are very important, but I am a little bit troubled by the way you presented some of the facts and the arguments. I'll give a very minor example, like a footnote in your lecture. You were mocking U.S. policy regarding supporting the Shah regime to gain nuclear weapons versus objecting the current regime in Iran of having a nuclear bomb. Well, this makes a very unreasonable claim. Like you want the police to have armed firearms, but you don't want the mob to have them. So it is a reasonable state to state that you want the good guys to have a nuclear bomb, or at least not deny them, or something like that. And at the same time, you want bad guys not to have a nuclear bomb. This is completely reasonable while you were mocking them. Also, you were saying...
Can I respond to that point?
Yes.
About that, okay? See, the danger here, I think you very accurately stated the position of the United States and the current government of Israel. The problem is good guys turn into bad guys and bad guys turn into good guys. The Shah's regime, which started its nuclear program, was overthrown, and all the same technology, the weapons, et cetera, suddenly came into the hands of other people. In Pakistan today, they have a nuclear bomb. The U.S. is certainly willing to go along with that, unless, of course, the fundamentalists come to power and get rid of Musharraf. So I'm for total non-proliferation. I don't want the good guys or the bad guys to have atomic weapons. I think the entire Middle East should be demilitarized, or certainly not be a non-nuclear area, because you never know who's going to be the good guy. Today's good guy is tomorrow's bad guy. Israel supported Iran in the 1980s. They provided arms and munitions to the Ayatollah in his fight against Iraq. That's a matter of historic record. But then suddenly, nowadays, the same anti-Jewish government with the same anti-Semitic statements is an immediate threat. You can't say they're good guys, so it's okay to have bombs, and bad guys, no.
Now, well, you are criticizing the rationality of foreseeing a change in regime, but this is a different issue. What I want to give another example. You said the UN committee is the only one knows exactly what happens in Iran, but you failed to mention that I think for at least 2 years they are denied access to the major plants there. So actually, I don't know whether the CIA knows more, but they don't know what the situation is.
Okay,
And I would like to go a little bit further.
Let me answer that. So just to answer that, first of all, the IAEA was never denied all access to Iran. In the various back and forth as the U.S. ratcheted up the pressure, they restricted their access to certain parts, but they've never completely banned the inspectors. And what's more, as it currently stands, under the agreement reached just in the matter of the last few weeks, the IAEA is allowed full inspection, and they have, not said. They've said that, that's what the new agreement is. Okay.
One last comment. You said you quoted Ahmadinejad as threatening the mere existence of Israel, but then you said something like Iran does not have, we don't have proof that they want to annihilate Israel or something like that. I remember that just before the first Gulf War, there was something that passed on the emails quoting a lady saying something like that. I don't think that the clown with the mustache is really that really intends to do what he is threatening. And then the signature was by someone, Gertrude, I don't know which, that referred to Hitler. Now, well, maybe Stalin. Well, I am not calling about the mustache phenomenon, but I want to say the world has learned that if you don't believe the bad guys about the statements, you are going to lose. So, and the good guys are not threatening. So by fighting those who make evil declarations, you will never fight the good guys, only the bad guys.
Okay. The most common the quote from Ahmadinejad that's used to indicate that he wants to wipe out Israel is a quote that he says, we must wipe Israel off the map. And in reality, again, I go into much greater detail in the book, he's quoting a slogan that was used by Ayatollah Khomeini for many years that is written on the side of the U.S. Embassy. It goes back that far to the early 80s. Then an accurate translation of it is, the regime in Jerusalem should vanish from the pages of time. That's the accurate quote, not wipe off the map. And that's an important distinction because nothing in that phrase does it mean that there's an immediate threat to bomb or otherwise attack Israel. But even more than the translation issue, it's a phrase it's a rhetorical phrase that Iran has used for 30 years. Including at a time when Israel was sending munitions and arms and spare parts to Iran during the 1980s war between Iraq and Iran. So Israel didn't mind anti-Semitism threats, support for Palestinians, support for terrorism. None of that mattered in the 1980s when it was supplying arms to Iran. But today, somehow, it's different. And I simply don't go for the good guys, bad guys thing. That was the whole Iran-Contra scandal that was, of which Israel was up to its ears in. So I would argue today, Ahmadinejad is not pro-people. He is certainly not pro-Jewish people, but neither is he Hitler. Neither has anybody shown that he is either intentions or capability of causing harm to Israel by an offensive military attack. That is simply an excuse that's used to scare people to build up the threat. We have the microphone here somewhere.
I'd just like to ask, I know everyone has stuff to say, and that's great. I don't want to cut anyone off, but if we could restrict it to questions that are short, that would be fantastic.
So 2 questions. I don't know if you gamble or not, but if you did, what odds would you give on, let's say, 2 events? One, a U.S. or Israeli military action within the next year, and the other, a publicly announced successful Iranian nuclear test in the next 10 years.
Okay,
What
that's
kind
a
of
good
odds
question.
would
I'm
you
not a
give on
gambler,
this?
but I'll accept the challenge. I think there's a better than even chance that the U.S. will will bomb Iran in this next period of time. Before,
Within a
by
year.
the way, I'm not the only one on that. The CIA guy I mentioned before said that he's absolutely convinced the U.S. will bomb Iran before the Bush administration leaves office.
So within 1 calendar year.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. The chances of Iran exploding a nuclear device in 10 years, I'd say next to nil. Very, very, very slim chance. And I say that again, not because, let's even say they intended, to do evil and they were really secretly doing this. It turns out it's really hard to develop a nuclear weapon. I go into a great deal of details. They've actually not done very well with their centrifuges. There's a nuclear embargo against them. There's all kinds of reasons to believe that even if they intended to do it, it would be extremely difficult to do so.
Because
Right, but their technology they had gotten everything from AQ-Con, and they had their technology very much further advanced.
if I give you my business card after this talk, can we take both of those bets? I could be even on both
I'm not a
of them.
gambling man, but we're on record here with Google, and
$10,
people will be able to
$20?
with YouTube.
If I'm to believe, I do believe that things are a lot about oil. I just wanted to comment from, I think it's in Greg Pallett's book, Armed Madhouse, talking about oil in Iraq. It seems that certainly it hasn't worked out as U.S. getting much value out of control of oil resources in Iraq, but there's a thesis very cynical in a way that oil companies here benefit when oil production goes down because we see the price go up and up. So I wonder if you put any credence in that being a strange logic of oil versus actually taking control of the oil resources.
There's absolutely no question that if the U.S. bombs Iran, the oil prices are going to skyrocket. And the only question is for how long, because anytime there's an international disruption of that kind, the oil prices go up. And there's no question that the Iraq war has tremendously benefited U.S. and other oil companies around the world because of the price of oil. Now, do they go into war with the intention of driving up the price of oil and therefore making profits? I don't think it's that simple. I think they look at it long term in terms of control of regions that have oil and the pipelines and the means of delivering it, and the beneficiaries of that are U.S. oil companies. And that's the way in which the oil companies make profit, rather than the oil companies saying, hey, we need to improve our quarterly profits. We need a war soon. I don't think it quite works that way.
Hi. I'm an Iranian, and I get privy to a lot of discussion within the Iranian community about regime change, and a lot of the discussion, especially coming out of California, where there's a high population of Iranian, especially in LA, is this sort of by any means necessary get the regime out of there, and a lot of pro sentiment towards the U.S. for doing military action to get them out of there, and people who echo your sentiments that will just bring the country to sort of support the current regime even more, like the Nobel Prize winner Shireen Ebadi is very against any sort of military action towards Iran. So I'm just personally torn between, like, what is it that we can do, sort of Western society, to empower the Iranian people to actually make some sort of change within their own system without military intervention. So that's my question.
It's a good question. And you're familiar with Akbar Ganji?
Yes.
He's, for those of you who may not know the name, he was a political prisoner 6 years in very brutal conditions in Tehran. He's a journalist. He just got out recently. He's now in the West. He's living in the U.S., at least for the moment. Very strong, very principled. I mean, he's put his life on the line opposing the regime and wants to see fundamental change in Iran. And he says the worst thing the United States can do is to continue the pressure against the Iranian government, and let alone to bomb. And so what he says is that you organize people-to-people support, not Bush administration-sponsored promotion of democracy, because that has nothing to do with actually promoting democracy. But just as you would, I don't know, with people in Mexico or other parts of the world, you need to establish ties with the human rights groups, with the unions, with the student groups, find out what they need, publicize. The one thing that can be done is to publicize their democratic struggle, what they're doing to show the fact that the people of Iran, that Ahmadinejad doesn't speak for the people of Iran in that sense. And you have to, but it's going to take time. There's no magic bullet. And I know exactly what you're talking about because I went down to visit the monarchists in Tarzana and other fun places in Southern California, and they're so angry at the government and they've been so powerless to do anything about it that, well, maybe this will work, right? But of course it won't. It'll have exactly the opposite effect. It's okay by me.
Just to follow up on the same issue, can you tell us about examples in history where aggressive activity towards a country actually helped overthrow its government and promoted the goals of the attacking country?
Well, the whole history of colonialism, I suppose. That is. Oh, you mean? Oh, I see. Like an external attack. Well, I guess the only example that would be used would be probably Kosovo in recent history, where the U.S. carried out an intensive bombing campaign, didn't put a lot of troops on the ground, and Kosovo split off, in essence, from Serbia. Or yeah, but I mean, they had ground troops in Bosnia. There was more. Yeah, it was a bombing, but I think your question was bombing, but no troops. Did I understand that correctly? Yeah, and even the situation. I mean, I opposed the bombing of Kosovo as well. But basically, you had a group of an opposition group / drug lords who were in Kosovo, the Kosovo Liberation Army, who then took power as a result of the bombing campaign. And it had to do with the weaknesses in the Serbian government that allowed that situation. But it's not a model. And it certainly doesn't apply to Iran because the government, for all its weaknesses and for all its problems, still has support among the population. And I mean, the thing to remember about Ahmadinejad, he is a genuinely evil man, but he is a right-wing populist. And he uses religion and he uses populism to curry a certain amount of support. Imagine if Pat Buchanan had somehow manipulated the elections to get elected here. And you've got, I'm for the working man. We got to kill all them Mexicans coming across the border, and what we need is to put religion back into the schools, and I'm going to help the working man by cutting, by increasing your wages. And, that kind of mix of fundamentalism and populism, that's what Ahmadinejad does. And he does have a certain amount of support, although it's declining because of the policies he's not delivering on all his promises. But there's no question. I mean, you have to ask yourself, why doesn't the U.S. plan to bomb and invade and occupy Iran? Why not? Because even they know that would be such a suicidal policy. The U.S. would be in a war for the rest of the century if it tried to occupy Iran, because the Iranian people wouldn't have anything to do with it.
So to follow up on that, if U.S. and its allies, the coalition of the willing or whatever, goes in and actually starts bombing Iran's government infrastructure and tries to overthrow the government, I doubt they'll go in with troops and try and occupy Iran. So then what are the likely scenarios after that? What kind of scenarios can likely emerge that are most probabilistic?
Right. Well, like I said, in a strictly military sense, the U.S. probably would dominate the skies and be able to declare a military victory. The Iranians might be able to hit a U.S. ship or down some planes or something like that, but there's no question that the U.S. will dominate militarily. But then what will happen immediately afterwards? And again, I go into much greater detail in the book. They could close the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow straits that separate the border of Iran, where 25% of the world's oil supplies come from, not just from Iran, but from other parts of the region. That would definitely send oil spiking very high and for a good period of time. So that alone is going to destabilize the region and the world economy. They would encourage their allies in Iraq to openly attack American soldiers. So all the people that the U.S. has been training as soldiers and army, some of them are already shooting at Americans anyway, but more of them would start doing so, and you'd have a serious uptick of American casualties in Iraq. There could be another incident between Israel and Hezbollah. Hezbollah is rearmed. I think both sides are expecting a rematch for last year's war. And Israel could come under renewed attack, missile attacks from Lebanon. Hamas could get reinvigorated to fire more rockets into Israel itself. I mean, you could see a real flare-up of very, very serious military conflicts throughout the region.
What kind of governments would emerge in Tehran?
Well, I think what would happen is you'd have an even worse right-wing government in Tehran than you have now. But I don't think it would lead to an uprising of the people in Iran. I think the current people in power would say, okay, we've been too liberal. We're going to put more people in jail, and because we're at war now and we're under attack, and you have to rally around us and make sacrifices to support Iran. Let's see. Oh, yes. Uh-huh.
Hi. I was wondering if you could address, not just in Iran, but in that region of the world and in the world in general, this whole notion of, I guess, dehumanization of peoples, and how, based on articles we read or whatever our information sources are, so by definition, they're limited, because even in today's, in this day and age, we obviously still have censorship. We don't get access to everything. It's not clear. We can't tell whether it's Iran or Iraq. All we know is that it's a difference between an N and a Q. Are they Arab? What the heck's an Arab? What do you mean you're Persian? How does all of that play into effect in a place like the Midwest, or places where they're more prone to look just to their news sources, whatever those limited sources may be, or believe more in their government officials and just take what they're given as, okay, this is true?
Yeah. Well, there's no question that there's a long history of lack of education and knowledge among people in the United States. And I bet you a poll would show most people think Iran is an Arab country. And to make a distinction between Iran and Iraq, and that they're all terrorists or something. I mean, there's lots of misinformation out there. This administration consciously uses racism and xenophobia for its political ends. It's not just something that goes on in ex-Yugoslavia, for example, or the former Soviet Union. I'll take an example of France. Remember in the run-up to the Iraq War and all the anti-French rhetoric we were getting? Remember all that? Okay, that wasn't coincidence. France was the only country that had the veto power to stop the U.S. intention, or that planned to use the veto in the run-up to the Iraq War, that would stop the official sanctioning of the U.S. plan to invade Iraq. So to put pressure on France, Karl Rove and his minions started this campaign. And they started vilifying the French as surrender monkeys. Remember, French fries became freedom fries, boycott French wines, and it rippled throughout the country. Now, France, I mean, who hates French people? I mean, there's not exactly a lot of history of that in this country. But suddenly, the French were like some kind of historic enemy. And I mean, the only thing is they have white skin, so you couldn't call them a bunch of nasty names that you would do to people of Arab or Persian origin. But it was the same kind of xenophobia, hate the enemy. And they just started making stuff up. They made up historical stuff, and et cetera, with a very particular political goal of pressuring France to vote, not block the U.S. in the UN vote. Now, you notice that's all disappeared. And now, of course, the French are our great friends again, because Sarkozy seems to be cozying up to the United States. Right? So the ignorance that you refer to is not just something that is historically or is a problem at the base, but it's something very, very consciously manipulated by those at the top. And we will see more of that should the U.S. actually proceed to bomb Iran. We're going to see all kinds of vilification of Iranian people.
I think we're hitting about 3 o'clock, so we have one more question.
I actually heard in the news that Ahmadinejad that believes in some prophecy that by having some chaos, the 12th Imam will come back around the time to take care, so that he might try to actually explode some nuclear bomb or somewhere in the Middle East, so that there will be a big chaos and it would have a rapture or something like that.
Right. Okay. Yes, the best accounts that I've been able to read, he does believe, without getting into the theology of Islam too much, he does believe that there's going to be a return. It's kind of a messianic concept, like God will return to the earth, our prophet will return. And yeah, he does believe in that. But it's a stretch to say, therefore, in order to bring this profit back, you have to like drop an atom bomb on somebody. That's where the logic breaks down. So the fact that he has that theological belief, and a lot of others which are pretty off the mark, doesn't mean, therefore, that he intends to drop an atom bomb. The other thing to keep in mind, in all of this vilification of Ahmadinejad, the president is actually very weak in Iran. The real power is Khamenei, the supreme leader, the religious leader. There's a majlis, there's a parliament that has a certain amount of power. There's lots of competing power modes within, or groups within Iran. And even if somehow Ahmadinejad went crazy and said that we've got to launch our non-existent atomic bomb, that doesn't mean that it would happen. So I just chalk that up to, he believes in lots of stuff that's pretty weird, frankly, including his theory that the Holocaust is up for grabs, needs more study or something like that. This is stuff that's just embarrassing to other leaders in Iran, not to mention the Iranian people. He's just flat out wrong.
So we're hitting 3 o'clock, so I think we're going to move on to the signing portion today. But I know people have questions, and if you
Thank you very, very much.